I'm going to check it out. Event at Webinar Jam. Webinar Jam. I believe that's the software.
Yeah. And we are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Global Wildlife Fair GWF podcasts. We are so excited to have you with us here today as we launch the podcasts with our first guest. This podcast is born out of a very simple idea that more young people should see themselves in the world of wildlife, not just as future scientists, but also as artists, illustrators, painters, photographers, guides, thinkers, maybe forest officers, or just as community leaders. Conservation needs all of us. And a lot of the initiation, the starts, are via stories. So, using this opportunity of podcasts, what we intend to do is bring forward to you stories. Each session or each episode, we will meet somebody who broke the mold, somebody who stepped out of their comfort zone to do something meaningful for the natural world. And there's no better guest to start this than somebody who has done exactly that, even before turning 20.
Yeah.
Please join me in welcoming our first guest, author of the book, The Light of Wilder Things, change maker, founder of Mission Eco Inspire, Ishan Shanavas. Ishan, thank you for agreeing to have this conversation with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So where do we start? I mean, we can start with a quick question that shall set the mood.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this question is actually by a teammate of mine. And the question is like this. Imagine the Ishan who just started writing the book, the very young Ishan, okay? When the very young Ishan meets the Ishan who is sitting with us today, what do you think that the younger Ishan would tell the elder one? Like, dude, you've really done it. Or why did you write all these and embarrassing things like that? Exactly the way it happened.
I think that Ishan would be a little surprised. I can imagine that Ishan saying, things actually worked out. Of course, I'm sure because of some of the embarrassing stories that younger Ishan might not be all that happy. But I think on the whole, seeing how things have played out, with the mission and a lot of the opportunities that have poured in, I think that Ishan will be over the moon. And I think more so than embarrassed. And so I think that Ishan's happiness
over the moon and not embarrassed. Is that what you mean?
As in, I think it will compensate for all the embarrassment that Ishan might be feeling.
Yeah, but I believe this is also a very good opportunity for you to also introduce your book to our audience today.
Yeah, that's right. I recognize maybe a lot of folks tuning in might not know. So I am the author of the Light of Wilder Things. All right, let me just focus it here. So yeah, the book is the story of my life over the last 7 years, from when I was 14 to 21, exploring wild spaces across India as a teenager. And so it traces those 7 years with me growing up like everyone else, navigating what it's like to grow up in our current world while exploring my passion for wildlife. So it explores my time in a boarding school that was next to a jungle. I did my schooling next to wildlife, and that's something maybe we can talk about here in the podcast. And so what that was like, and then my time being part of a lot of research projects and just on-ground wildlife conservation across India's Western Ghats, and even exploring India's Himalayas. And so the book traces that journey. I'm happy to say it's a #1 bestseller and whatnot, but it's also an intensely personal journey. And of course, I think writing the book has been one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever done. And just the response that we're getting from readers is it's quite overwhelming, but in the best way possible.
A quick question. In our age, not a lot of young people would want to write a book. Why a book instead of, say, vlogs or, say, podcasts for that matter?
I do get this question a lot. I don't think of it as either or terms. Like it's not as if this is because I did this, I'm not going to do that. Why did I choose to write a book specifically? I can say that writing and rather reading has been a big part of my life. It always has been and it always will. The reason I got interested in this space is in large part due to the wildlife books that I just read growing up. I would spend my time, especially writers like the late Valmik Thapar, someone who we lost recently, along with Ullas Karant and others, and so many other naturalists, George Schaller, E.J.T. Johnson. There are many names, but these folks wrote records of their times in the jungle, and a lot of these photographers made books out of their photography, like wildlife photography. And as a young child, looking at all these photographs and going through these words, I felt like the stories and the animals in them had a profound impact on how I thought. And I knew that I had a story, and I had a story that could have a similar impact on readers. And so, given how much books have influenced me, I think it was only fitting that I wrote one that would impact other people. So that's the underlying motivation behind why I wrote the book.
In your previous answer, you just mentioned that people kind of wrote their experiences. So when the younger Ishan was journaling things in his diary, did he ever think that he would end up publishing a book?
That's a good question. So, and this is something you know as well. I think whenever you go to the field, and I think this is a practice everyone should do, even if you're not interested in nature and wildlife, it's a good thing to keep a journal of things that happen. For instance, I keep a journal of stuff that happens to me every day. I just write the journal before I sleep. And especially when I go to a wild space, I write down every day the things that happened that day. So I write about what I saw, what the experience was like, where I went, and so on and so forth. And so I have like cupboards full of journals recording all these encounters. When I wrote them, it's funny, I wrote them for myself. So like I was the only audience I had in mind. I never thought that these writings would later be published. But then once the idea of the book came along and we really got into it, I turned back to those writings and I used those stories that in many ways, okay, gets into the the semantics of writing, but I think it's something the listeners might find interesting. I wrote only for myself to read later on, but because I knew that I was the only person that was going to read my journal like later on, I wrote it with such vulnerability and not filtering myself, and that allowed me to preserve the essence of the stories, which I then converted and I adapted for this book. And so
we will come to the unfiltered part.
But the beauty of journaling,
one thing I noticed in your book, where you wrote about your school and how you were not allowed to use mobile phones or internet much, and you were into reading. You had to be into reading because of your school, right? What influence did reading have on you? And what would you tell to people younger than you or people who are not younger than you about reading?
I think the power of words is something that we all don't fully acknowledge. I think words have such tremendous power because words can be used for good or for ill. It's just the way you arrange words in a sentence that can convey a message from my brain into your brain. So these books, and I mean, to give context, when I was in this boarding school, students were not allowed to keep phones, and so just to pass the time, we needed to do something. And so I found myself sitting in the school library more often than not. And so the fact that I could learn about the experiences of someone working in the Andamans, of someone walking through the Himalayas, of someone out there in the Brazilian rainforest, the fact that I could learn about their experiences from the comfort of my own chair, I think there's something very powerful in that. So I think the beautiful thing about reading is that as you read, and especially the kind of book that I've written, you as the reader form an image in your brain. You're trying to put yourself into the position of the author as they talk about their experiences. And I think that there's some magic in that because it's in some ways a very immersive experience if you make it to be. And so that's what I think. I think reading has a lot of potential to shape how you think, and it certainly has shaped how I think.
You're a reader, you're an explorer, and you also go to jungles. You explore, you go on treks. Do you believe in superstitions? And I'm sure you must have heard a lot of local stories.
Oh, more than you can count. Yeah, I
You have
try not
mentioned a
to,
few of them.
but especially in the mountains, which is inherently a very mystical landscape, you find yourself starting to, and I have to consciously tell myself to stop. Like there have been so many places in Uttarakhand, like deep inside the forest, where they say, "Do you hear that call?" And I know that call is of a particular bird, and they say, "No, Ishan, that call is of a ghost of someone who died here 200 years ago or something." And that person is calling for help. All right. And when the locals plant that thought into your mind, the next morning or like late at night when you hear that call, you're just like, maybe, just maybe it's a ghost. And so yeah, I try not to, but superstitions sometimes creep into my mind.
Uh, Talking about superstitions and stories, would you like to share another story, say from South India, your experiences in Kerala, your ancestral home? Did you come across any such stories of superstition?
From South India, at the moment, nothing comes to mind, but there are. I think a lot of tribal folk, the few that I've interacted with, I mean, they are just encyclopedias of both knowledge and stories like this. Uh, I can't think of one that I've experienced, but I can tell you, like, I mean, is it a popular legendary story? Maybe it's not, but of these two children that get lost in the forest, and the mother goes to search for them, and these two children drown in a river, I believe. I hope I'm not making this up. Like, this is something that I read, and their that sound that they made crying out is now the sound of a particular bird. And so they're like that. This is just a broad archetype of so many stories that you find in these small pockets across the Western Ghats.
You have similar stories about hornbills in Nagaland, where the lover became the bird. And they're fascinating, and they say a lot of the local culture. You also mentioned that you never thought that your journaling would turn into a book. So this is the major part of the conversation today. How did that happen? The idea of coming up with a book, getting connected with a publisher, finalizing the content of the book.
Oh, that is several podcasts worth of material.
Yes,
But the idea of the book
is it in 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you. I'll give the crisp version. The idea of the book came about when my dad one day just walked into the room and he said, "Ishan, maybe you should write a book about all your experiences." And he left the room after that. And just that simple offhanded comment, like, stuck with me. I was like, that's such a good idea. And in many ways, you can say that the book was in the making with all this journal writing that I'd done over the years. And so I that evening only, I opened this laptop from which I'm speaking to you right now, and I just like brain dumped whatever came to my mind, a rough structure, what are the stories that I wanted to include, what kind of impact should the book have, just so on, just notes. I brain dumped, I think it was some 5,000 odd words onto the page, and then that over 2.5 years got shaped into what we have today. I think, and this is not exclusive to nature writing, I think writing a book is a very, very intense process. It is grueling, it's not easy, it is borderline traumatic because of how much rigor that goes into it. About shaping the book, so the book of course went through many different structures. I first thought maybe, and I've never shared this, I don't think I've shared this publicly, but the book was initially supposed to just be a collection of essays, a collection of different stories, but that doesn't really lend itself to easy reading, so we scrapped that. Then I thought
it's like an anthology.
Yeah, an anthology type, but anthology of my own writing. So it's not an anthology of different writers.
Yeah.
But then I think as we progressed and as I got through the first draft, that did not really, like, it wasn't having the impact that I thought it would, especially with beta readers and so on. And so we switched it again to an anthology of writings on particular places, something on Idiki in Kerala, something on Agumbe in Karnataka, something on Kumaon in Uttarakhand. Like, this is what I thought. But then that as well did not. And so I realized this is after a lot of back and forth with my editor, that a memoir structure, something that just followed the chronology of my life, that would be the best, because it would, of course, give the readers a look into my life and give them more incentive to stay with my journey and see how things played out the way they did. And so that's how we landed on the structure. Writing a book, I mean, if whenever someone tells me that they're writing a book, I immediately feel for them, because I know the kind of work that it takes. It's for anyone listening, it's a arduous process, but if any of you writes a book afterwards, just let me know and I'd love to check it out.
Well, I almost shat my pants while writing a master thesis.
Yeah.
And my friends are writing their PhD theses right now. How much time did you take to edit? Because I struggle with it. I'll be very honest. I'll go very personal in this part. I struggle. So even when I write about things on my blog, I start with the way I generally speak, and it ends up after multiple drafts in a very formal, structured way. Your writing is very heart to heart. It connects. Like I would have never written in a book if I have published that I had to pee. Yeah. And then when I was peeing and it happened to be on a wild boar, I had my pants half down and my friends came over. So I would have like instantly, edited them out and gotten a final version, which is extremely formal, but it would not really connect with any of the readers. So did you get any guidance because according to me, this was a masterstroke. Like I connected to your writing because that is the way I speak. That is the way I speak with my friends, and that is unedited version, to be very honest.
You bring up so many interesting points. Let's talk about it one by one. So writing versus editing. A lot of people tell me, Ishan, I suspect you spent 90% of your time writing and 10% editing. It's the other way around. The first draft was perhaps 70,000 odd words, and I edited that over 10 drafts. So editing means cutting out, removing, restructuring, so on and so forth, over 10 drafts. The industry standard is 3. I did 10, or maybe perhaps it was 11 drafts by the end, before we started printing. And so that's just the maniac that I was, in terms of how rigorous I wanted it to be. Now in terms of, I think a lot of people confuse editing with, I mean, it's not confusing, but they associate it with cutting out a lot of stuff, which is true. But what you were talking about is filtering, right? I think something that wannabe writers, or those who at least want to think like writers, should understand is that there's a difference between being edited and filtered. The ideal, especially the kind of writing that I want to do and I think resonates the best, is to have it be as unfiltered as possible, but edited in the most crisp manner so that there's no fluff. All right? Especially with writing, I think a lot of us add extra unnecessary words. Even in the way that we speak, there is all these ums and ahs, and that's sort of equivalent in writing. Like all those words should be cut out, but the message should be unfiltered. I feel like, and this is something that my editor taught me. In fact, I think my editor is perhaps one of my greatest mentors, because a lot of the initial drafts were stories that painted me in such a great light, like, oh, I saw this and it was such a great, experience. But that only works with 1 or 2 stories. You cannot have a book with many, many great experiences. Like that's just not something that the readers will connect with. They'll get bored after a point. But the minute I am vulnerable with you, and this is something, even I'm sure when you connect with another human being, you connect because that person is being vulnerable and they're opening themselves up. So to the example that you pointed out, and this is to give the listeners,
shouldn't have.
So my hostel,
I probably shouldn't have.
No, that's okay. We'll give them a taste. So my hostel was my boarding school was in a jungle. It was nested in a forested valley in Andhra Pradesh, and my hostel was right next to the jungle. And so I would regularly, toss out scorpions and frogs and snakes from my hostel, and regularly run across wild boars and so on. So on this particular occasion, this was the middle of the night, and we had climbed to the hostel roof to play Monopoly, and the climb is a little hard. It's hard to describe, but it's a little hard to get up. So I had to pee, but I didn't want to climb all the way down and go to the toilet. So I just went off to the side and started peeing off into the forest. But it's dark, mind you, and these wild boars come at come after dark to dig up the roots near the building. And so it turns out I happened to aim right on a wild boar, and that was I won't spoil what happens after that, but that was several intense seconds that I certainly will never forget. And so that's a story that, of course, I think makes a lot of people laugh, maybe cringe, but at least
I laughed a lot.
yeah, I mean, the idea is to get them to laugh. But the point is, it's something that a lot of people would feel uncomfortable to talk about. But the fact that I could just share it so openly on the page shows the reader that this person is actually human. They're not a robot, and that allows them to connect with me as they go through my journey in the book.
So that style of writing was a conscious choice.
Very much so. I mean, it was a conscious choice, but it was a choice that was presented to me only after the first or second draft or so. Like, that's something that my editor helped me realize. So yeah, but it was conscious on my part of choosing it, at least.
So when you say editor, this is the editor from the publication house.
Yeah. So every author works with an editor. Sometimes, like, big authors work with 2-3 editors. Sometimes, especially big authors who have to publish different versions, like in different countries, they work with separate editors and so on. So I had an editor, and he's a lovely man.
For our audience, would you like to tell how you got connected to the publisher?
Sure. I mean, there are many different ways. I'm not going to really get into prescribing this.
No. How you got in touch?
Yeah, I mean, I happened to get approached by this publishing house, and we knew some folks. It was not that official. So then they heard about this story, and we talked it out, and then we signed the deal.
Nice. In one of your chapters, you mentioned that you were excited that you'll go and work in the wild. Your friends thought that you're doing something extraordinary there. But you went, you sat down, you observed, and you came back. And after some time, it became mundane. So a lot of people romanticize wildlife work. But people who go to the jungle, they know it is not always as, exciting. You're not always chasing cheetahs or saving, I don't know, a fish from drowning.
A fish don't drown. They suffer.
Precisely my point.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
What would you like to tell them? How
I feel like
it is in the jungle?
No, I get the angle you're going for. I feel like, especially in this social media culture, it's easy to romanticize other people's lives, and I feel like wildlife lends itself to that sort of romanticization. I think it's easy to look at people, and I won't even use the word work with wildlife, because I don't. Do I work with wildlife? Do I not? I'm not sure. But like, people who at least dabble in this space, it's easy to see something like that as very exotic. But every job, every person's life has a lot of monotony, and that's something we might as well just say out loud. So on this particular occasion that you described, I was tracking a king cobra. That's something that I was part of. I was volunteering, and the minute I say that, so I go to schools and I tell them the story, and they're like, "Huh, you were tracking a king cobra? Wow, you are like the junior Bear Grylls." And that's certainly what a lot of my friends thought when I told them this.
Yeah.
And I was sitting, I mean, you want to call it 10-15 feet from this snake that was resting in someone's farm. And so it's easy to hear those sentences in isolation and think that this was such a fascinating life. And it certainly was a fascinating experience for the first 3 days. But then you realize that animals are really lazy. They conserve their energy a lot. And this particular snake was not doing anything. It had just finished mating and so on. And so every day it got out of this particular burrow it was using at the time, basked in the sun, went back down. In the evening, came up, basked again, went back down. That was it. That was all that the snake was doing. And mind you, this is a king cobra, so it is an exotic snake by nature. But even after 3 days, I was like, this snake is not doing what I saw in the documentaries. And, it's not running after other snakes. It's not, doing all this crazy stuff. And I think documentaries paint a picture of action. And that certainly is part of these creatures' lives, but it is a very small part. And I think what I try to acknowledge in the book is that there are long periods of monotony in any person's life, and that's something that we might as well accept.
Building on that, you have mentioned quite a few things in your book, but I cannot go into details because we are really short of time now. But two things I would really like to bring up. Will you be okay if we extend this conversation by say 10-15 minutes?
I'm down, yeah.
Okay. One question you ask in your book, which I found lovely. When a snake was stuck in the thorn, you thought whether you should rescue the snake or would you let the snake die because that's a natural process.
Oh, that is a touchy subject, but it's important one that I think we all talk about. It's very important. So the story is this. I was actually following a kingfisher that time. That's interesting. So I was
Yes.
running after this particular bird when I spotted a rat snake swallowing a chameleon. Okay, so this is one of those action moments that in the wild. It's very rare to come across. So you can imagine my excitement. But as I watch the snake, I watch something terrible unfold, where the snake for one moment is swallowing this chameleon, and then it gets a scale over here stuck on one of the thorns. And I don't know how many of you have observed snakes closely, but there is a slight opening in which the thorn had got. And so the snake, in trying to free itself, jerked back, but that just lodged the thorn deeper into its skin. And so it was this convoluted situation where the snake was trying to free itself, but it got itself more entangled. It was a pretty brutal struggle. Like its neck started just streaming blood, and I was slowly watching this big rat snake. It's by far one of the biggest rat snakes I've seen in my life, 6 feet plus. Like clearly a really huge individual in its prime. And I was watching this snake suffer, and it really looked, after a good amount of time had passed, that it looked like as if the snake was going to die there, because it was really, really just getting impaled deeper. And I was stuck with the dilemma of, do I save this snake because I want this creature to survive, or do I let it die? Because the snake got itself entangled on its own. This wasn't by any human intervention. And so in the natural order of things, if the snake was to die, it was to die. These are things that happen in nature, and me interfering in that process would be unnatural. A lot of people see tigers hunting deer, all right, and think, oh my god, that deer should survive. It has its own fawn, like its fawn won't survive. Let's shoot the tiger and kill it. But the tiger also has its own, life. It also has its own cubs to feed. It also has its own role to play in the ecosystem. And so the emotional and rational part of my brain were fighting each other, where the rational part was saying, listen, maybe that snake had to die. Maybe it had to die and decompose and nourish all the surroundings. And me interfering would be denying the plants and all the other animals that scavenge on the dead snake's body. That intervention of, like, my intervention would be denying them their sustenance. And so I cannot say I reached a resolution. I was still struggling with this dilemma in my head when the snake finally, made a different movement, and it tore a couple scales, but at least got the thorn out. And so this part was streaming, right? It was a bad wound, but it didn't look like something life-threatening. And finally, the snake just went up the tamarind tree. I remember it was a tamarind tree, and vanished. And so that's at least it robbed me of. It didn't rob me. It did not. It allowed me to not make it. It allowed me to not have to make that decision, because that would have been a hard one to make.
I need to point out that it is 7:31, and we have over 20 people in the audience right now. If you have questions, please feel free to just write down the question and send over. You can write in the Q&A only, and I will be able to see the questions from there. Getting back to the conversation, Ishan, there is another thing you mentioned, which is very close to my heart. You go to see a tiger for the second time, only to not be satisfied, because there's a queue of jeeps, one seeing the tiger shooting, the next one going, and you couldn't even hear the birds because there were so many cameras shuttering, for the lack of any better word right now.
I know that's yeah, I can describe that experience. So yeah, so the sort of spark that ignited this flame of of passion that I have for these creatures was when I saw a tiger when I was 14 years old. It's a very intense experience. It's definitely my one of those moments that I return to constantly in my life. It really was like when I learned so much about myself. I've never felt that kind of intense fascination ever. I don't think in any lifetime I've felt that when I saw that tiger. So that's perhaps the moment that I got interested in wildlife. And so, I mean, not when I got interested in wildlife, but the moment that things started tipping over, and I just like I lost control over my passions. So uh, when this happened, I spent many years wanting to see a tiger again, and I was like, oh, it's going to be such an intense experience. And in 2020, and this was right as COVID was reaching the global stage. I remember India had maybe 20 or 30 cases, and I was in Aurangabad, which was then a later like hub for, like, not hub is not the right word, but like a city that was ravaged by COVID. So I was there right before this. This was March 2020, give or take a few weeks. And so I was there when we went to Tadoba. We drove across to Tadoba Tiger Reserve, and I was like, okay, you know what? It's been how many ever 4 or 5 years since I'd seen a tiger. I need to see one again. This is really this, and it's going to be as intense an experience that it was back then. Lo and behold, we're a few minutes into the safari, and we hear these alarm calls. And so the driver immediately, he slams the gas pedal, he turns the thing, and I'm there, with this anticipation building in my heart. But then suddenly the weirdest thing happens. Instead of going deeper into the jungle, I start hearing people. And I'm like, hey, are we going outside the jungle? And then we make this final bend, and suddenly there's a jeep right there. And I just sort of stand in the vehicle, and I look, and there's this whole barrage of jeeps, and they're all basically in a queue, just like how people crowd outside like a concert or something. They're all in a queue to go towards a waterhole where there's this tiger sitting, Matkasur, which is, I think, this famous tiger from Tadoba. This gorgeous male in its prime back then. And so I was like, I really felt something drop in my heart. And by the time our turn rolled up, because there were turns to see the tiger, that initial anticipation that I had vanished, and I just felt incredibly disgusted. I was just thinking about how this was no different from going to a zoo. Right, this tiger was effectively caged by all these jeeps that did not care about the animal's welfare, but it was just they just wanted photographs. And I felt just an intense distaste for how we have commodified this animal, where literally everyone was just mobbing it to get the best photograph. And so I include that photograph in the book, and the photograph is actually a very pale representation of what I actually saw. I include only a few jeeps in that image, but there was so many jeeps. I mean, I could count maybe 100 or so that were there trying to look at the animal. So I think these. I mean, I understand the tiger fascination. I mean, literally, like, look who you're talking to. This is the animal that got me interested. That's a fabulous animal, and I have other tiger stories, which I can maybe share later. Maybe off call, I'll share with you. But seeing it like that, and seeing how this animal has been subjected to capitalism like this, that did not sit well with me. And so that's, I think that shows how tiger safaris really need some reform, where things need to be toned down a bit.
I hear reforms, but I'll come back to that. There's a question, and the question is, what do you feel? Okay, there's a lot of questions. Wait. What do you feel about tiger reserves tourists only interested in tiger viewing?
I understand where the feeling might be coming from. I would pose a question. I would encourage them to try and look beyond, because I think it doesn't take that much effort for one to realize that there is this whole plethora of creatures roaming, even just India's wildscapes. And so just a little effort on your side to look at other animals will open up so many doors for you, and I'm very excited to see where that leads for you. So whoever said that, wait, can you tell me the person's name? I want to answer people by their name.
Chitra Mishra Sharma. She's actually a
Chitra. So
teammate.
that's what I would say to those people, and I wish them all the best.
There are more questions. I have two screens on two sides.
Okay, go for it.
Both screens are having questions. But since you mentioned about reforms, and you also touched topic on in your last few interactions, I liked how in one of your videos you quoted Barack Obama, who quoted Martin Luther King. And the quote goes like this, like, put your hand on the arc of history and bend it towards a better future. So
that's a paraphrasing of that quote. I believe that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's paraphrased, and this quote is by Obama. Right? So we have few stakeholders, right? We have the civil society, we have the government, we have the wildlife and enthusiasts, and each one of us have some role to play. We discussed about people wanting to see only tigers. What do you think should be the role of governments in forming regulations around this, and also in conservation? Not specific to India, but governments in general.
The role is very clear. The role is to protect these creatures, right? I mean, I think the question, and I think this is what you're asking, is about getting them to do it, right? I mean, the role is getting them to do this job with the gusto that is required. I mean, the role of these governments is to protect these wild spaces because, and there are many reasons. I'm not going to get into why we need to protect them. I think that's something we can all agree on. But I think we're not seeing climate action. Why? I mean, let me move beyond wildlife to just protecting the environment. I don't think we're seeing reform at the pace that we need it, and I think we need to stand up and ask for it with greater vigor because ultimately, I mean, the role of a government is to serve the people, right? And so if this becomes a broader public concern, then I think we can expect to see stronger reforms passed. And so that's
talking about public concern. Since you mentioned public concern, what do you think is the role of civil society in this?
So the converse of that, and this is something that I'm trying to work towards right now, is I think their role is to demand this from their elected officials, right? I think if this is a priority for the voting base, then politicians will, tailor their manifestos accordingly, right? I mean, ultimately, the goal of these people, we elect them to do the work, to work for us, right? And so if we say that this is something that we want you to do, will you do it? If you do it, we will vote for you. I think that sort of loop needs to be instilled, and that starts with, I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but that starts with teaching people about the natural world, because for good or for ill, for ill only, we don't have just enough awareness. Like a lot of the public in India doesn't know about wildlife, and that's something that I'm trying to address now by visiting different schools. Is we need to get them first aware, and then we need to get them inspired to care for these animals. Because I mean, if they're not aware, then they cannot be inspired, and if they're not inspired, then this will not become a concern that they will take up with their elected officials.
Yeah, two things here. In at least two instances in your book, you mentioned, like the first time you caught a snake, it was going to the hostel, the dining space, and children were very agitated. They were afraid. They were shouting. They were howling, and the snake was confused. That is more or less what you mentioned. And you took the snake out. For the first time you touched a snake.
Yeah.
How you do not know how you did that, but you did that. There is some sense of lack of awareness about snakes or animals within the younger people. That is number one. That is the sense I get from your book. Second is, when you went to your ancestral village, you started educating the people in the local language about the flora and the fauna there. You have also come up with Mission Eco Inspire. What are you going to do in your initiative to raise awareness bottoms up?
So let me give snakes a shout out, because they are a particularly demonized group of animals. Movies like Anaconda and Snakes on a Plane and so on paint these creatures as such vicious beasts, but I have found them to be some of the most gentle and misunderstood animals on the planet. And this is something that I talk about. I think all of us, especially, all of us listening to this talk, have felt misunderstood at some point in our lives. I'm sure all of us right now have some story coming back to us where we were misunderstood. And imagine an entire species being misunderstood simply because of these tropes around them. People ask me, what's your favorite animal? And snakes are one of them, simply because of how interesting and weird they are. Like, they look like an alien to me. Like this creature with these perfect scales, it looks almost artificial. And so that's why I try to speak about them. So snakes is so as part of mission. Okay, so what is Eco Inspire? I'll nest snakes into that. Eco Inspire is my environmental education program that I take to different schools, where over the last few months we've been going to schools across southern India, and in fact, day after tomorrow I have to fly to Trivandrum to do an entire week of schools there, where I talk to students about the natural world, and we talk about different groups of animals, especially, and snakes being one of them, to break their stigma. And I try and take the students through my journey, but more so through my journey through wildscapes across India. So I take them to the Western Ghats through the visuals and my stories. I take them to the Himalayas. I take them to the Eastern Ghats, just to show them that we are blessed to be in a country with such beautiful animals and such beautiful landscapes, and it is up to us to now protect it from vested interests. And so that's I'm happy to say that we have reached over 7,000 students. I started out thinking maybe I should do maybe 100 students. If I can reach 100 students, that would be great. But we've reached 7,000, and the goal now is to reach 25,000 students, which I'm sure we will just blow past. And so I have to say though, the response has been overwhelming. Like, these kids are fired up, they are excited, they really want to learn about about the natural world. My Instagram is just bursting with messages saying, Ishan, it's so hard to reply to all of them because they're just thousands at this point. And so I can tell you that we are on the cusp of a movement. We have started a movement, and it's only going to grow from here.
Trust me, I have a lot of more questions, but I feel, given the kind of questions we are getting, I would request the audience to write shorter questions so that I can read it like quickly. We will take a couple of questions from this screen, and then this screen, and then here. Okay, two questions.
Can we take the question from Sania, because she's a friend of mine?
Yes. Sania Sheikh?
That's right, yeah.
That's a long text. Okay. So she writes, thanks for the great talk, and I'm sorry this might be loaded question, but I'm eager to hear your perspective. Looking at global movements like Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, young people's resistance is instrumental in conservation. However, we're living in a time when young people are vehemently being lured by companies like OpenAI, for example, to ignore the environmental costs of their tech in order to pursue a version of the future that prioritizes productivity over meaningful connection with the wild, let alone conserving it. Do you think such resistance can exist in a world where young people's drive, as well as their critical skills like writing, risk being atrophied? If so, what will help? I take it a bit personally, being a data scientist, but go ahead.
No, Sania, I think you really point out something that is topic agnostic, right? It's not even wildlife. I think this lure to productivity is something that is cannibalized the way people think. I think it is a sort of insidious mindset that has penetrated every form of life. How do we tackle it? Oh my God, I don't want to sound prescriptive because I don't think I've reached that stage yet, but I feel like a lot of this messaging comes from what we see online, and we're sort of made to believe that that's the way we need to think. But meaningful connection, I think, comes from just meeting people around you. and realizing that, okay, you know what, you're also under this, hypothetically, like speaking to someone and realizing that they are also against this, unnecessary hustle culture. I think that is something that can help. Again, this is not me being prescriptive. This is just me, thinking out loud. It's a loaded question, but I mean, I love loaded questions. It's just that it's something that needs a little more dissection, and we need more heads. We need more of us to put our heads together and think about it. But at least it's a conversation we should be having. That's absolutely right.
I'll paraphrase Avichal Tiwari's question. What he essentially wants to ask is, he's busy with his schedule and work and preparation for exams. How would a person manage time for wildlife visits, given the kind of schedules we have?
All right, I'm gonna take something from that question about why it has to be a wildlife safari. I think that's such a misnomer. Like, wildlife safaris is a tourist practice. All right, I think there are many other ways, maybe more meaningful ways of engaging with the natural world. A lot of students, echo this concern. They tell me, Ishan, you know what, I want to do this, but I just don't have the time. And the important thing to understand is, you don't have to be formally working as a conservationist, quote unquote, to be helping the natural world. This is something you could do in your weekends. This is something you can do in your evenings. The nature of this space is that even 5 minutes that you commit to, helping the natural world in whatever way, which we'll talk about, even 5 minutes every day can make a huge difference. All right, this is something that you can do part-time. This is something you can do on your own time. This is something that you can do even once, like, that can make a difference. What can you do? Instead of going for a luxury trip to Bali, maybe you go and volunteer at a research station in the Western Ghats. Instead of going for that fancy trip across Europe, go for a simple trip to Uttarakhand, and whatever money that you've saved up, and give it to people that actually need it. Believe me, there are don't even, these are quite far-fetched examples, right? You can start by joining the local birdwatching club in your own town. I love the thumbs up that came on my screen. But you can join the local birdwatching group in your own city and learn about the birds around you. I mean, Abhichal, I'll just ask you this: do you know the birds that visit your own locality? Say you're in a residential complex. Can you name 20 birds that visit that building? This is something that I ask students. Listen, you've been in the school for 8-9 years. Tell me 20 birds that visit this campus, and most of them just blink at me. Right? If you could document, and this is something that I've done across several different scenarios. If you could document the wildlife that visits your own locality, you will be able to create a resource, a list of all those animals that can then go inspire a younger child to, step outside their front door and look around them. That's something that can make a difference. That's something that actually can have a tangible impact on someone's life. So I will say start there. That's one of my goals, is to get people to look out their window, because I feel like just that deliberate act of looking for wildlife around you reveals that there are a lot more animals living beside us, just hiding in plain sight. So that's my answer to you, Abhichal.
Building on that, recently I was invited to an international school here in Kolkata, where I asked the students before I met them that which birds do you know that exist in your neighborhood, and they came up with crow, eagle, not really eagle, it's a kite, but crow, sparrow, pigeon. And then I showed them 70 birds that are in Kolkata, and they were all amazed. So when you talk with younger people, does that motivate you?
Oh, it does.
To do more? Isn't that one of the best feelings that you'll have?
I think there's just this contagious energy that children bring that I feel like some of us lose while growing up. I'm not grown up, so I don't think I've lost it. But
even I'm not a grown up.
Yeah, I know you look younger than me, Anirban. This is something that, of course, gives me meaning in what I'm trying to do right now with the mission, and it's something that I now understand why teachers teach. Because I've talked to 7,000 students across schools. I can see why someone might want to teach, because there's just this fascinating energy that you get from looking at them just eager to learn. And so yeah, I'm motivated because the next leaders of our world are energetic and out there wanting to do something.
I had a stray comment, but I'll do this extremely offline. So there is a question by Kabir, and he asks, having studied sociology and anthropology for your undergrad, do you find yourself interpreting animal behavior through human lens or the other way around?
I would caution against that. I don't think, and the technical term is anthropomorphizing these creatures. I don't think that leads anywhere. Like, for those of you who don't know what that means, like saying, oh, this animal is going somewhere, maybe she feels like she needs to do something, like you're prescribing a feeling to this animal. That's you don't have the space to do that, so just don't do it.
Like it's like dumping human behavior onto the animal.
Yeah, I don't think my degree influences the way I think. I just I try not to. Like, I mean, I want to think the way I think, and the degree is just knowledge that I've gotten. And so say it does that, and I'm glad it doesn't. Kabir, interesting question though.
Mention one animal that has inspired you to learn something new.
Oh, that's an interesting question. There are so many. One animal that's inspired me, one group of animals that have inspired me are migratory birds. This is another question that people ask me a lot, and I'll tell you why. Because, and I write about this in the book also, I think all of us learn about migration at some point, but it doesn't really dawn on us what a crazy experience this is. Like, this bird, which is the size of my phone, is coming all the way from Siberia. It's right outside my backyard, but it's coming all the way from Siberia. Like, this bird is traveling across the planet. Like, us humans, much bigger, stronger, capable creatures, have to sit in a metal tin and fly to Siberia. But this bird flies all the way from there and comes to my own backyard. Like, these birds, they don't see international borders. They can traverse these air currents, these harsh air currents, to come all the way to where I live. They show us that that these borders are just lines on a map. And this is not my quote. This is the quote of Noah Stryker, a very eminent bird watcher. But it speaks to the same message of how these birds show us that we are so much more connected on this planet than we realize. And that's something that I think we can all take to heart. So migratory birds are creatures that inspire me to be a better human being.
Okay. We'll have only 5 questions for rapid fire. It is highly recommended by the team.
Yeah, okay. Go for it.
So I'll ask you a question and you have to answer in extreme short, to the point, right there. And then we have the closing remarks and close the conversation.
All right. Go ahead, yeah.
First question. Which animal would write the funniest book?
Frogfish. If you don't know what that is, everyone Google it.
Okay. That's a homework for all of you there. Yeah. One extinct animal you would love to bring back?
The Tasmanian tiger.
How? Why? But later. Which animal would make the best author?
An elephant, definitely. They're so wise.
I so want to ask why, but okay. If animal had jobs, what would a cheetah do?
It would be a cop, because they could catch criminals running away.
I'm sure there are faster animals. Are there faster animals than
cheetah?
The
peregrine falcon is the fastest creature on the planet.
Yeah. So wouldn't they be cops?
Yeah, I mean, but the cheetah is more than enough. Is fast enough for something like that.
But if a thief is a bird, the cheetah can't fly.
Yeah, good point. So we'll have peregrine falcons being like Navy SEALs or something.
Yeah. This brings us to the close of this conversation. I wish to have a lot of more conversations with you. This was really heart to heart. I mean, I have so many other topics like megafauna. You in one of your interactions, you told by reducing wildlife only to those creatures in far off forests and polar region, we do a disservice to those animals closer to home. You touched on that topic in response to Avichal. In one of your media interactions you told. Wildlife documentaries and Instagrammers espouse the idea that wildlife is out there in faraway land. To see it, you must undertake grand expeditions to the ends of earth. So what does a college student with a burning thirst for wildlife in a fearless landscape do?
Yeah, that's.
Yeah,
It's weird
I
to hear my words being read out to me, but yeah, that is what I say.
like you know that I've been following your work for some time. We have interacted earlier. I love the questions that you pose, and I look forward to more questions and more conversations.
Same.
At this point, I really need to ask people who have stuck around for almost an hour, 3 minutes to an hour, to drop in your comments, questions, your feedback about this discussion that we had. In case you have not read this book, please order this on Amazon.
Amazon, that's right. Yeah.
And write a review, because at least I would want more and more people to read this. This is like an entry to a lot of things in the wildlife space. Absolutely love that book, and absolutely love this talk, Ishan.
Thank you so much. I put the link in the chat. Thank you everyone for joining. I just want to say it's an honor to have you here.
Yeah. Good. I think this is a safe time to disconnect the call, but I will take this opportunity to talk a bit more.
Yeah, okay.
Please go and like the page of the Global Wildlife Fair. This is an initiative by Asian Adventures and backed by Wildlife Trust of India, Asian Ecotourism Network, the Global Ecotourism Network, and trust me, there is a long list of backers. Go be a part. All of us in our small capacity, we are trying to make small changes which we believe will make bigger impact. Ishan is there with his book, with Mission Eco Inspire, collaborating with Global Wildlife Fair, talking in the podcast. Each one of us are trying in our own ways to talk about it, build more awareness, connect people. I thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, everyone.